Now on the Regeneration Show.
How to stay away from toxic positivity with Bastian.
Walking around thinking, how happy am I, is a bit pointless. There's surely more important things to think about in this world than whether or not my emotional state is where I'd like it to be. There's more important things to think about, more meaningful pursuits.
Your itinerary is being regenerated. Please turn right. Turn left. Turn right. Regenerating. Please take a 180-degree turn. Please take another 180-degree turn. Going forward, wake up 15 minutes sooner. Keep up with world events. Determine your retirement spending needs. You are going in the wrong direction. Try paleo. Regenerating. Conserve your water. Lower your resting heart rate. Please turn around. You might have left your oven on. You have reached your destination. The Regeneration Show with Andrew St. Germain and Stephanie Katona.
Hello and welcome back to the Regeneration Show. Redo.
You're going to say the Regeneration shit?
I almost said shit. I think that needs to be, you need to add that on there. The Generation really... Show. Okay. Hello and welcome back to the Regeneration Show. I'm Stephanie Katona in Los Angeles, California.
And I'm Andrew St. Germain in Toronto, Ontario.
I know there's been a lot of changes happening at the speed of light for both of us. So do you have any updates for me?
Speed of light. I like that. I don't think I've ever moved that fast.
I think that is super cheesy.
Yeah, it is. But I like cheesy, extra cheese. No, speaking of light, I had something that I want to ask you, and not because we're bored or boring, but I want to know about the weather in California because you're a Canadian girl, born and raised. So being in California, is it the same? Is it Groundhog Day every day? Is every day pretty much the same climate?
The weather is always between 20 to 27 degrees here every day and sunny. Yeah.
And so day to day, does it mess with you? Because I take my mood cues a lot from the weather. Like maybe I'm feeling a little bit, I don't know, in a hyper streak of going out with my friends all the time. And then a rainy day will just come along and be like, okay, maybe you should stay in today. Maybe you should read a book. Maybe you should be more reflective. But if it's just sunny and beautiful all the time, do you know how to gauge your emotions?
That's a really good question, actually, because I'm the same like you. My mood and emotions are the weather dictates that for me a lot. And sometimes I like it when it's rainy and stormy and just going into my own little world and cave.
Same. Yeah.
So no, it's always sunny here, and it's very hard to stay inside because you just want to be outside and enjoy the weather. So even when I'm inside working, I feel like I should be outside because the weather is nice.
Yeah.
So it's this weird thing.
So you're still adjusting. I was wondering about that.
I'm adjusting, but I mean, I'm not complaining because there's blue skies and sun here every day.
I know, but okay. Are you able to wear your chunky turtleneck sweater?
And no, I can wear my leather. Maybe you know what? In the evening, on a cooler evening, I might be able to.
Did you even bother? Did you even bother packing it? Did you?
I did. I even brought a pea coat. I brought a pea coat to Los Angeles. Okay.
Okay, you might need to sell that. It's just gonna. I
know, and it's heavy. The packing thing. I brought minimal things, and this pea coat is the heaviest item that I brought, and I'm not even wearing it. I love
so much that you packed minimally, but you were like, I can't leave without my pea coat.
Without my beige, beautiful pea coat that I'm never going to wear. I might need to sell it or just give it away. Anyway, what I wanted to highlight here is that change, even good change, can be destabilizing, overwhelming, and anxiety inducing. And I'm someone who's always had my MO is to just, it's all good. I got this. Like, that's my classic line in life.
Yeah.
And my therapist / intuitive healer lady that I work with, she called me out last week and she said, Stephanie, I know you're trying to pull out your checklist again and reach your goal of being done with healing and working on your emotions. But remember, this is a lifelong process and journey. And you know what? Thank God for her putting me in my place like that. Because I need to get comfortable with the fact that even if there's big changes happening and they're positive, you can still feel, fear and anxiety and just kind of being able to move through that and work with that.
I think especially when you're moving, if you make a big life change, you never want to highlight any of your doubts, or you never want to even mention any of your discomforts or anxieties or anything, because you don't want other people to weigh in like, oh, do you think maybe you made a mistake? Do you feel regret? Is that kind of how you're feeling?
No, it's more just it's just more a feeling of overwhelm and anxiety, because there's just a lot of things, a lot of big changes happening. And
Yeah.
probably the biggest changes that have happened in my life since
Ever?
since getting out of university and starting my first real job and all that, right?
Yeah.
So my point is that even though I just want to be clear that even though I'm up here talking to you about being present with difficult emotions and becoming conscious, I myself still fall into these old patterns. But, pausing and taking the time to self-reflect helps get me back on track. And another thing I'd like to share is that even though if you revert back to an old pattern of behavior, it does not mean you have failed and taken steps backwards, because every time that we go back to an old way of being, we have this opportunity to really sit with it. And when we come out of it, we gain new insights and information about our inner world, and we start chipping away at these patterns with intention. And over time, the new you will begin to take the lead.
I feel like moving triggers all of these emotions, don't you?
Oh, moving is huge. And what's interesting is I don't even like to move, but I've moved so many times in my life. Even in Toronto, I moved every year and a half to 2 years to a new place. So what does that say about my personality?
I don't know, but I have not moved. I got to Toronto and I stayed put. So what does that say about my personality?
I think we're very different in that way. I think I was reflecting, I was like, does this mean that I get bored easily, that I need to have a new environment constantly? So good, a lot of things to reflect on.
And I just look around my apartment and I go, that couch is just so heavy, and those shelves and like everything. Moving is so troublesome. I don't know how people do it all the time. Like, do you ever unpack the boxes?
I
Like,
know.
do you ever feel settled?
I don't know. I mean, I always try to get most of it done in the first couple of weeks, because then if it just sits there for a month, it's just too much. You just feel scattered, and you know how it is. Like your environment, your living environment is a reflection of your inner world. So you don't want to be living in a space that's with boxes everywhere.
No. I was giving this advice to someone in my life recently because they were moving from a family home into their own condo, and they were trying to resist the tears. They were kind of talking sarcastically, like, oh, call the ambulance, waterworks, I'm being a total baby right now. And I said, stop talking like that. It would be weirder to me if you didn't cry on a life-changing day like this. That is a healthy reaction. The unhealthy reaction would be to suppress it and go, no, I can't let anyone see me cry.
Absolutely.
So that was my experience when I moved when I was 18. It was my first day of college, and my parents had helped me move into my apartment, and then they left on their road trip back home, and it's way, way far away from where I currently live. And like I said, it was my first day of college. There was so much change on one morning, and I just literally closed the door behind my parents and just collapsed on the floor crying. And I was so afraid, Stephanie, that my mom, like, because she's notorious for forgetting things, I was afraid that I'd get a knock at the door like, sorry, I forgot my purse, I forgot my wallet, I forgot my keys. And then see me
as
crying.
You're bawling your eyes out.
I just did not want them to see me cry. So I ran to my bedroom, and I hadn't bought Kleenex or anything yet. So I'm like drying my eyes with t-shirts and underwear and like anything that I could find.
That's healthy. That is that is a healthy way to deal and cope. And with that change.
I've never cried about being alone ever since. I think I just purged all of my fears and anxieties that morning. And I've acknowledged everything that intimidates me about this, and now I'm just going to face it.
That's really good and healthy, like I said. And this ties into our whole topic for today, which is all about toxic positivity.
Yeah.
And we've been conditioned as a society to dismiss any emotions that are deemed as bad, such as shame, anger, fear, and loneliness. And this pressure to feel okay and happy all the time really invalidates the range of emotions that we all experience. It can give off this impression that we are defective when we feel distress, which can be internalized in a core belief that we are weak or inadequate. So in today's episode, we are going to explore and tackle the topic of toxic positivity, the impact that it has on our psyche, the difference between valuing happiness versus prioritizing happiness, how to recognize toxic positivity messages, and how to navigate our way through it in the workplace, in our social circles, and on social media.
So that's a lot. And so we can't do it alone. We're going to bring in Brock Bastian from Melbourne, Australia into the conversation.
I'm gonna have to give you credit for like being able to pull this guest on with 3 different time zones. The guest outreach side must be
guest outreach. Oh my God. Do you know what happened to me? I'll tell you a quick story. So a friend of mine who hosts a radio show, she knows I'm Indigenous, and she was producing a segment for and about Indigenous youth. And she asked me if I could help with the guest outreach. And I said, absolutely. And I reached out to all these different daycares and schools and after school programs and community centers. And I try to incorporate traditional language in a way that you say hello in Ojibwe is buzu. And I think it's so cute because buzu, it kind of sounds like bonjour and also sort of sounds like bisou, which
I love buzu. That's so
buzu.
Cute.
Isn't it cute? It sounds like the French for hello and kisses. It's so cute. I say, hello, buzu. I'm Andrew. I'm reaching out for my friend so-and-so. But Stephanie, it was so embarrassing. The autocorrect changed buzu to boohoo. So I reach out to all these like youth programs and I'm like, hello, boohoo. I'm Andrew. Reaching out for my friend. And what a surprise. No one got back to me. I'm like, it wasn't my fault. It was autocorrect. I feel like
that stuff happens all the time.
I'm sure it does. I'm just still reeling from the embarrassment, but boohoo, I'll get over it. And how appropriate for today's show, because we are going to be dealing with all of our emotions. We're living with our negative emotions, and we are going to avoid toxic positivity. And to join this conversation, like I said, we are going to Melbourne, Australia, and we're going to meet Brock Bastian. He is the author of The Other Side of Happiness and a professor who researches pain, happiness, and morality. And he's next on The Regeneration Show.
You're listening to The Regeneration Show with Andrew St. Germain and Stephanie Katona. Pass it on, theregenerationshow.com.
Joining us now is Brock Bastian. He is a professor in the School of Psychological Sciences at the University of Melbourne, whose research focuses on pain, happiness, and morality. In his research on well-being, he has addressed questions such as why promoting happiness may have a downside and why valuing our negative and painful experiences in life is a critical pathway to achieving happiness. His book, The Other Side of Happiness, was released in 2018, and he has published over 100 peer-reviewed journals that have been featured in outlets such as The Economist, The New Yorker, and The Huffington Post. He joins us now from Melbourne, Australia. Brock, welcome to The Regeneration Show.
Thanks, Andrew. It's good to be here.
So first of all, me and Stephanie are both, she's currently in LA, but we are both Canadian, born and raised. There's a lot of synergy between Canada and Australia. I hear that they're very similar.
Well, it's true. Although I have, I spent some time in Canada, and I was told that Canada is more like New Zealand, sort of small brother to the larger continent, so to speak. But I think, but actually, I mean, in terms of culture, I do think, I mean, New Zealand and Australia are pretty similar too. Well, New Zealanders won't tell you that, but yeah, there are a lot of similarities. It's true.
I have yet to visit Australia. I remember actually after finishing my undergrad, I wanted to go study at, what university was that? It was in Melbourne, actually, the University of
Melbourne.
No, it was, I can't remember the name.
RMIT or Swinburne or La Trobe or Monash.
No, Queensland University. Is that in Melbourne?
No, University of Queensland. That's in Queensland.
Okay, right. Duh. Okay, close enough.
Yeah.
But anyway, I haven't been to Australia yet. I do want to visit. So one day I'll make it out there.
Where did you go when you came to Canada?
I went to Banff and washed some dishes and skied
Okay.
as much as I could.
Yeah.
And then I went across to Vancouver Island, and then hitchhiked across to got to Toronto, and then caught a bus to Quebec.
Okay, so you've been around.
Adventure. Wow.
Yeah, been across Canada. Yeah.
Was that your first time skiing, by the way?
No.
Okay.
I worked a season as a lifter. No, I've skied. We have snow in Australia, you know.
Yeah, I did know that.
I did not know that.
There you go. It's not as good as over there, but no, I'd been working in the snowfields here for a season and decided to follow everyone across to the next winter. So yeah, it was great. I enjoyed Canada a lot.
That's awesome. All right, so let's get into it. So my first question before we get started is, what inspired you to want to study and research well-being and happiness?
Well, I mean, broadly, I suppose, promoting well-being or building mental health is probably the core, tenet of psychology in general. But also, I guess for me, I was interested in a slightly different angle on happiness. As I was doing my PhD, I was also training to do counselling work, applied work with people, and I learned about an approach called acceptance and commitment therapy, which is really about how people learn to accept and be comfortable with their negative and unpleasant experiences in life. And one of the things, as a social psychologist, again in my research, I'm more of a what you call a social psychologist, which doesn't mean I'm particularly good in social situations, but it does mean that I'm interested in the sort of contextual and those broader cultural as well influences on how people think and behave. And so I guess I was interested in the fact that whilst in this particular form of intervention, we were focused on helping people to feel comfortable, with their unpleasant and negative experiences in life. In the broader social context, very much the opposite message was often being pushed, where you would see that importance placed on being happy, the value of positivity, even within psychology itself, the positive psychology movement, which again was an important iteration on a focus on mental illness, but in some ways perhaps got rolled out in ways that didn't always take into account that it might have had that backfire effect where people felt the pressure to try and maintain these positive states. So I guess my approach to thinking about happiness is a little bit on that flip side, where it's, when can it become problematic, our search for happiness or our pursuit of it.
I'm sure you're fine in social situations too. Don't cut yourself short.
Exactly.
But about that flip side, what is exactly, how would you define toxic positivity?
Yeah, so I think that being happy, pursuing happiness in life is of course a really good thing. It's valuable, but I think it becomes toxic when that pursuit of it leads people to feel like they're failing, as if there's something wrong with them, as if they are not meeting their important goals in life to be happy whenever they experience those negative emotions. And of course, we inevitably do. We evolve to experience those emotions. So it's kind of a crazy value system if you think about it. To think, well, I'm experiencing some of these evolved emotions that I'm meant to experience, and now I'm failing in life. Where did that come from? But it is the way we tend to think about it, and I think that there are some sources of social influence which can lead to that too. So I think toxic positivity is where that pressure to maintain happiness and the state of positivity all the time is so great that whenever we dip away from that, we actually respond and react badly.
Mm-hmm.
So it's about managing expectations.
Very much so. Yeah. I mean, I think a lot of poor mental health is often about misplaced expectations. Yeah.
And what would you say are some of the negative impact that it would have on a person's psyche, just always trying to maintain this level of, happiness and dismissing these other emotions? I mean, yeah. I can think there's probably a million effects.
Yeah. Well, I mean, broadly, what we know is it just produces the opposite. So, it actually leads to more unhappiness. It leads to more depression, more anxiety. It leads to people to negatively evaluate themselves whenever they do have those negative emotions in life, which of course isn't helpful. Just to think just because you're feeling anxious, you're now a bad person, or your value as an individual is somehow dropped, is obviously not a helpful response. So yeah, broadly, it just produces exactly the opposite. Another way of thinking about it actually is, and this has been another approach to understanding the process. It's a little bit like if you think about human goal pursuit. When we set up a goal and we want to move towards that, we're often assessing along the way. How are we going in terms of meeting that goal? And often along the way, we might feel disappointed because we're not quite where we want to be. And if that's a fairly concrete thing like buying a car, then that disappointment will feed into my motivation to, go and earn some more money, to save some more money, and then buy the car. It doesn't make the car less attainable. Yeah. But when my goal is happiness or an internal state, that actual process of disappointment pushes that state further away, makes it more unattainable for me. So it sort of frustrates. It frustrates the ability to achieve that goal. So it's just our internal worlds are sort of more ironic than our external worlds.
Definitely. And I mean, you see it everywhere. I think it's so deeply ingrained in our society, and you see it on social media. And I'll be honest, like I was maybe the queen of toxic positivity for most of my life until 4 years ago, until I started actually sitting with my emotions and stopped distracting myself. But I had always been like, it's fine, it's all good, not positive vibes, that whole thing, right? Which is a load of crap, really. And led me down into a really dark place for a long time, like dealing with, anxiety and depression. So I love this conversation, and I'm happy that you're here talking about this.
Yeah, well, I think often we just misinterpret what it means. I think I talked to a lot of people during, Melbourne. We now have the prize of being the most locked down city in the world. We're out of lockdown now, thank God. We're all pretty tired. But people were saying to me, "Look, I don't know what's wrong with me. I'm not coping." And I'm like, "There's nothing wrong with you. It's a pandemic, and you're in lockdown. Yeah. That's the problem. You're fine. These negative emotions you're experiencing are expected. It's par for course. And we just forget that sometimes. We think, well, how come I'm not coping, and what's wrong with me? Well, actually, probably nothing."
Well, I think also the pandemic, the whole world came to a complete stop, and we didn't have as much access to things that we were distracting ourselves with before, like social things and going out and drinking and all these things that people had been using. And so I think it was a really good opportunity for people to sit with those harder emotions and to really go inward. I think that it went two ways for people. I think some people did take the opportunity to do that, and some people were like frazzled, like how I'm not sure, like, what are all these things that are coming up, and
they weren't coming up. You just weren't
repressing them for so long.
Repress them so easily anymore.
And I think that the pandemic kind of was a catalyst for a lot of this in some ways, But in your research article on toxic positivity, you talked about this difference between valuing happiness and prioritizing positivity. So can you tell us a little bit more about this? What were your findings with this?
So in that particular paper, we picked up on so that valuing happiness. It's really I'm talking there about two different measures that have been used in the literature. So the valuing happiness measure was used by a number of researchers who started to identify that when people place a high level of value on happiness, it tends to have this backfire effect, and so similar to sort of our research looking at it from a social perspective, they were looking at it more the individual perspective. And then some other researchers, perhaps a little more aligned with the positive psychology movement, who felt that this was maybe short selling the value of pursuing happiness and positivity in life, came along and developed a different measure, which they'd called prioritizing positivity. And whereas the valuing happiness measure is negatively predicting well-being, particularly in the US, the prioritizing positivity measure is positively predicting well-being. So one's bad for well-being and one's good for it. And so the question is, what's the difference? And I think the way that they kind of pitched it in the sort of follow-up article looking at prioritizing positivity, they really, I suppose, it's a bit more about structuring your world in a way which would allow for happiness, or thinking about things in a way which is, well, if I do this and I do that, it's probably going to make me happier, rather than thinking or constantly assessing how happy am I in the moment. So, it's a little bit like that more behavioral approach to it, rather than assessing and maintaining a kind of constant dialogue. Am I happy enough right now? It's more, well, I'm not really focused on my immediate state so much, but I am focused on doing things that are likely to lead to happiness following up from behind.
Right.
But then what we did in our research was to show that really another important difference there was that whereas the valuing happiness measure was associated with this measure we have in terms of how much pressure people feel to avoid their negative emotions, the prioritizing positivity measure wasn't associated with it. So we sort of showed that, again, as I said before, one of those key elements in making it toxic is that it actually leads people to feel very uncomfortable with their negative emotional states. And so that tendency to constantly evaluate and constantly assess how happy I am in each moment tends to lead me to sort of feel bad or worse, or respond badly, as I said before, to those negative states. So we kind of added that part, that piece to the picture, if you like, in our paper.
Yeah. But just in that everyday default setting, should we aim to be happy throughout the day? Maybe content is a better word.
Well, I think it's good to reflect every now and again on ourselves, and people do that when they come into therapy. You reflect on how things are going for you, and often you do that at times when things aren't going so well, and you think, okay, I think something needs to change here, right? And so people might come into therapy for that reason. They might want to talk about what needs to change. But after you've sort of sorted that out again, I often use this rather crude analogy. It's sort of like you take your car to the mechanic, but once you get it running again, you don't keep looking under the bonnet. You put the bonnet down and you drive the damn thing. And I think that's sort of the analogy here, right? I mean, if I think walking around thinking how happy am I is a bit pointless. There's surely more important things to think about in this world than whether or not my emotional state is where I'd like it to be. Exactly in that point, in that point in time. And I do want to be able to reflect and have those insights. I want to be able to do that, because if you can't, that's where you often end up in trouble. Right. But once that's all sort of done and dusted and I'm back on track again, there's probably more important things to think about, more meaningful pursuits, helping others, doing good, making a difference, and look, those things will make us happy. We know that.
I really do like what you said about prioritizing happiness, because putting things in place, taking action, and doing things that'll ultimately elevate our sense of well-being, surrounding ourselves with the right people, working out, like sleeping, all of these things will ultimately lead us to being happier people, happier and more content, rather than, like you said, focusing on obsessing over, am I happy all the time right now? Am I happy? That is just not realistic.
And absolutely. I mean, beyond the sort of basics, like, just good physical and general, health, which is really important. I mean, exercise is really important. I also think it's underrated sometimes. But sleep is as well. We know that too. But apart from those things, I think, some of those other pursuits, they're actually valuable in their own right, even if they don't make you happy. And I think that's really important, So, they will make you happy eventually. And these are the things that are actually going to lead to overall probably greater well-being. But you're not evaluating them constantly, whether or not they made you happy in that moment. And there are other reasons to do them too, which I think are more important and more valuable. And sometimes that leads us to sort of step away from ourselves a little bit, and perhaps not be so obsessed with, evaluating that part of it.
I think they're just good habits to put in place. And I mean, like you said, like it's not, because I worked out, I'm not instantly going to be happy, but over time of putting these healthy habits in place, it will probably lead you to being a more content, happy person in the long run over time, if that makes sense.
No, absolutely.
But on a very elementary level, making sense of toxic positivity, it also kind of sounds like the person who's a little delusional and just too cheery all the time, like that turn your frown upside down you referenced in the article. So when someone is going through something, like if a friend is coming to you with some sort of trauma in their life or grief or something, we are kind of expected to say, oh, it's going to get better, or look on the bright side, but what do we say in these moments without being so cliche and without also being unreasonable?
Well, I think it's the same thing that people need to learn for themselves, and maybe people who aren't comfortable with it for themselves find it hard to do with other people. But you gotta sit with some of that emotion sometimes. You don't have to step away from it immediately or try and pull someone away from it immediately. I mean, a really nice thing that I've heard in other cultures, people say, which I'm sorry. It doesn't mean I'm taking responsibility for your pain. I'm not saying I did it, but I'm sorry that you feel that way. And it doesn't mean, oh, well, come on, let's get on, back on the horse. It's like, well, no, I'm sorry. That seems really hard and really, really difficult for you. And you validate that. And then that's it. You don't need to kind of quickly step away from it because it feels uncomfortable. And actually, that's what people need. They need to feel heard and validated. And when you sort of try and step away from it too quickly, and when people sort of, oh, don't worry, you don't feel heard. People don't feel validated. And that's really
sometimes I feel like people really just need your presence and for you to just hold that space for them. And you don't even need to say anything a lot of the time. I think it's just people want to be seen and heard and validated. And I think that you being there and your presence there ultimately, I think, is all they need. You don't even need to say much,
No, exactly.
But we're uncomfortable. We get, well, not everyone, but most, because again, society. So we're uncomfortable with, okay, this person's dealing with a lot of grief. I'm not sure I can handle the discomfort of my own emotions when this, I don't know if I can hold the space for this person. So I'd rather maybe just not be there or just distance myself.
Some people sometimes feel offended by it. They feel, don't put your stuff on me,
Oh yeah.
Well, that's a whole other story, right? There's
but that is also maybe a side effect of toxic positivity. If you don't acknowledge how you're feeling in the moment, it's bound to backfire, as you said, later. And at that point, you're taking it out on people who didn't even trigger that in the first place. So if work is frustrating you and then you take it home with you, then that's unfair to your friends and family.
Yeah, that's right. But no, I think in the general principle is, that it's important. Look, life sometimes, gives you lemons, and that's just how it is. There's no point in. We don't always have to turn into lemonade. Sometimes we can just go, that sucks.
And just be in that state and be okay with it. Be okay with not being okay. As you said, I think you did mention that in your article. Be okay with not being okay.
Yeah, another word I often use is getting discomfortable.
Discomfortable.
Ooh, I like that.
Being comfortable with the discomfort. I mean, I think that we often just worry that we're opening Pandora's box or we're going to sink. A really nice analogy actually. So this is the idea of quicksand. So often we think that our negative emotions are a bit like quicksand, right? And we want to step away from them because we might sink into them and it all feels too much. But actually, if you think about, I don't know if you've ever been stuck in quicksand, and I never have. I don't even know where quicksand exists, to be honest. But I've been told that if you ever do get stuck in quicksand, that what you don't do is struggle. You don't try and get away or get out. The more you struggle in quicksand, you sit, right? So what you do instead is you spread eagle. You try and establish as much contact with the surface of the quicksand by with your body as you possibly can, and then you're probably more likely to float and you stop struggling. And that's really a nice analogy for how we want to respond to our negative emotions. When we struggle with them, we sink into them. But actually, if we come close, establish contact with them and stop struggling, they actually diminish. We don't sink. And it's an ironic process again, but it's a nice one in terms of thinking about, I suppose, that difference between, struggling with those or becoming comfortable with them and allowing them to be.
I think
That's
there's a lot
beautiful.
of fear that people experience when it comes to, like, I think the fear, well, for me in my past anyway, the fear had always been, I'm not sure I can cope with these quote unquote negative emotions. And I don't even like to say negative emotions because there's no such thing as good or bad emotions. They're just
Unpleasant,
emotions.
unpleasant and pleasant.
Unpleasant, right?
Is the right one,
And I
yeah.
think that there's that fear, that underlying fear for people, that I'm not sure that I can cope. So what you just said about the quick, like just allowing the emotion to flow through you without
Yeah.
trying to resist it. I love that quicksand.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
love it.
Yep. Yeah, it actually it becomes, it sort of is diminished. I think another nice way of thinking about it is, often when you turn away and run from these things, they actually get bigger and bigger from behind. But if you turn around and face into them, they start to diminish. And a nice, a nice way of thinking, well, a very practical way of thinking about that is actually, what one of the things that I often tell people who are experiencing panic attacks is, next time you feel like panicking, try as hard as you can to panic.
Mm.
And actually you can't. It's, it tends to, I mean, it doesn't mean you won't ever have a panic attack again, but it's a nice way. You've turned around and you've gone, okay, bring this on. And as soon as you do that, the panic dissipates because you're counteracting it with an approach oriented, stance. So sometimes turning around and facing into these things diminishes them, as opposed to, if you try and get away from the panic and you try not to have the panic, it tends to you're actually more likely to panic.
It's just
Yeah.
like fear, like when fear is, if we actually just bring it to the surface and kind of work with it and make friends with it, it loses its power.
Absolutely.
In a way.
That's right. So it tends. So again, our intuition is to, is stepping into these things might lead us to sink into them, but actually it's the opposite.
So that's very practical for in the moment when you feel the panic coming on or when you feel that. But you also mentioned in the article the attitudes to happiness. When people prioritize behaviors that maximize the likeliness of future happiness, rather than attempting to directly increase their levels of happiness in the moment, they are more likely to experience improvements rather than deficits in their well-being.
Yeah.
Can you expand on that?
Well, again, that's that idea of the more behavioral approach, structuring your life in a way which is healthy, which is likely to contribute to your well-being, perhaps doing things, helping others, connecting with friends, doing things that are meaningful and purposeful. All of these things are valuable in their own right. But we also know these are the sorts of things that are likely to lead to overall well-being. And if we sort of focus on making sure they're part of our lives, then we also know that our happiness will follow. It will follow up, but we're not kind of constantly evaluating, is this making me happy, or I'm doing this because I expect it to make me happy. Sometimes my reasons are otherwise. Sometimes I know I'm connecting with friends because they need me there, and that might be it's actually a really nice thing to do, is to be there for somebody else because they need you. And look, it'll make you happy, but you're not doing it for that reason.
I've heard that to-do lists help, even if you write even your mundane tasks, like make your bed, just that check mark, like, yes, I made my bed today. And
absolutely,
like, it makes you feel accomplished little by little.
Well, absolutely. So I think, a big part of cognitive behavioral therapy and the behavioral part to that is just a recognition that structure in our day allows us to, I think, structure our internal worlds as well. So, when you get up, when you sort of roll out of bed at 10 in the morning and think, what am I going to do today? There's a lot of room for anxiety and depression there. when you sort of get up at 8:30 and you're like, right, breakfast, 9 o'clock, go for a walk, 10 o'clock, do something, then this and this. And then you get to the end of the day, you go, right, okay, I did all those things. That's good. I feel a sense of achievement, as you said. So yeah, that actually helps us to keep our emotional worlds in check by having those behavioral routines in our lives. We do well with some routine. We got to get out of that routine too sometimes, but have a break.
Yeah.
But on average, having some routine is quite.
I can't live without my checklist. I don't know how people do it. Like, I wonder, does everyone have a checklist? Because I definitely do.
I think we all do. Maybe we just vary on
the detail.
That's right.
So I think it's also important to, recognize where we're getting these toxic positivity messages, whether it's in our workplace, within our families, in our social circles, and, how we can how can we manage or work through it if we're bumping up against that in our work or within our families? Like, how do we navigate our ways through that without, offending anyone or not invalidating ourselves?
Well, I think awareness, as with most things in psychology, awareness is sort of 95% of the game. So, when you're aware of the influence, you're able to account for it and to recognize that it's playing a role, and then take that into account in the way you respond. So, I think some of the inroads in this are often not even intentional. So I think a big one is probably advertising. Because we're advertised to a lot. And advertisers, of course, want us to see that their products are going to make us happy. So they pair their products with happy faces. If you have a look, if you have a look around you, there's a lot of happy faces looking at you constantly, and so it's that just sets up a norm for us. It sets up a norm. Okay, this must be how I'm meant to feel. I think advertising is an important route there. Again, I think, the cultures that we work in maybe as well, and some of the ways that, organizations perhaps have set up their cultures may be a little bit like that too. Families too. A lot of families feel uncomfortable. And look, that can be a little bit harder, I suppose, because these are people who we do want to be able to rely on. So that can be a little more difficult. But again, I think there are a lot of these, social media, of course, is a massive one. I mean, how many, I don't know what you were referring to before, Stephanie, but I'm assuming maybe some of that toxic positivity was portrayed on social media, and we all, we all do that, right? We don't take a photo of our face there, looking sad and say, just failed.
Yeah. Totally. And social media is huge. And I mean, my advice is like to people with that one is, because you can get really sucked in the rabbit hole with that, with all the toxic positivity messages, is to really be conscious of the accounts that you're following. The 5 accounts that you follow, I feel like they should be inspiring. They should be authentic. And, just really being mindful of what you're consuming on social media. I think a lot of people, unfortunately, especially the younger generations, they're, there's a lot of messages out there that are not helpful, and,
Yeah, that's right. So I think there are these influences. We've also started ranking countries on their subjective well-being, their levels of happiness. So we know that Denmark is the happiest country in the world.
I've heard, yeah.
Really?
I'm not sure if the Danish actually necessarily all agree with that. I think they feel they have to say that because it's a very sort of socialist culture, and if they don't, they're letting everyone else down. Sorry, all the Danish out there, I've got that wrong. But again, that's been a really important advance in terms of thinking about the kinds of well-being indicators that go beyond GDP and these more objective indicators. The subjective well-being is important to think about in terms of the success of a country. But again, it's sort of led to a ranking system, and now we're sort of ranking countries on their happiness, and of course that sends a message too. So I think these messages are quite they come from quite a few different multiple directions. But I guess it's about just recognizing that sometimes we are going to be in situations or see influences even quite subtly around us that maybe promote the value of positivity and happiness, and just to remember to perhaps mitigate that a little bit for ourselves, also mitigate that a little bit in the way we respond to other people as well. Make that space for that it's okay if you wake up, again, if you wake up and you're having a blue day, the best thing is just to go and have a blue day. Do all the things that are okay for a blue day, and you'll probably find you're better off the next day after that. If you kind of start getting frustrated with yourself and start to struggle with that, and you're probably going to be blue the next day too. So it's it's just realizing and recognizing there's time and place for that.
Yeah, and not comparing yourself to the influencers or comparing yourself to Danish influencers, least of all.
They have blue days too, I'm sure.
Because I was going to say, because we know they're obviously experiencing blue days too. They're just not talking about it.
Get what was it again?
Getting discomfortable.
I love that.
I love that too.
So is this your third show? So
This is our third,
Yeah.
So
Yeah, we're so happy to have you on. Thank you so much for sharing all of your knowledge and insights on this topic. And I really enjoyed reading your research article on toxic positivity. A lot of new insights and information
well,
in
definitely.
today's episode, which I'm
Thank
sure you
you
guys
for
did.
making us feel international and legit, even though I guess we are the same as Canadian and Australians.
That's right.
We all answer to the same queen.
It's true. That's true. We do still. Yeah.
All right. Well, you take care there in Australia.
Likewise.
Thanks so much. Bye, Brock.
Thanks. Bye, Brock. You're listening to the Regeneration Show. I'm Andrew St. Germain.
And I'm Stephanie Katona.
And we have been speaking with Brock Bastian, a professor at the University of Melbourne and the author of The Other Side of Happiness. And we've been talking about toxic positivity. And really quickly, you know what I remembered just now, Stephanie?
What is that?
The book that you lent me last winter, The Rosie Project. He was also a professor at the University of Melbourne.
He was. Now that rings a bell, actually. That's so interesting.
I wonder,
right?
I wonder if they know each other.
Well, there's a sequel to that book, by the way, which you can borrow because it's in my storage now in Canada. So maybe somehow we can get it to you. Because
you're going to send me on a mission to your storage unit?
To the storage unit all the way up north.
All right. Well, that sounds great. Merry Christmas to me. But on the topic of our friend Brock Bastian of the University of Melbourne, how do you think the conversation went?
It was really, really good. And I think that, so if I'm going to reflect back on our whole episode and conversation with him and, what I've learned or unlearned, I'm going to say the biggest takeaway for me in terms of unlearning in that episode was the whole research that he did around prioritizing positivity versus valuing happiness, and how it's actually better for our mental health and well-being to prioritize positivity, because we are essentially prioritizing things that will lead to more contentment, but we're not fixated on having to be happy and that being the only purpose, which is what happens when we're valuing happiness. We're constantly asking ourselves, am I happy right now? And so the way I look at it, it's more process oriented versus outcome oriented. Prioritizing positivity is more process oriented. And so the way what I would compare this to as a trainer and someone who's worked in, health and fitness, it's kind of like comparing it to starting off on a fitness journey. So if you're obsessed and fixated on fat loss and the number on the scale, it can lead to disappointment, feeling defeated, unhappy. But if we focus on the whole journey and embrace the whole process of doing things that'll make us feel better, such as better sleep, nutrition, exercise, this will naturally elevate our sense of well-being. And then the aesthetic results will just follow.
Yeah, that makes sense. If there's other more shallow, superficial things that are holding you back from feeling satisfied in your accomplishments, it sounds like you're prioritizing the wrong thing.
Exactly. So I thought, so that was the biggest thing that I unlearned in this episode. How about you?
I learned that bonnet is another way to say the hood of a car. I learned that, it's interesting. It goes back to our conversation with Lynn in our previous episode where she talked about having to name your emotions. Anger, shame, fear, loneliness. It's harder than it sounds, actually. I've been trying to do that ever since that conversation, because she also said emotions are there to teach us. So if you suppress anger, if you suppress shame, suppress fear, suppress loneliness, and prioritize happiness above that, then you're not getting the lesson that those emotions are trying to teach you. So this unlearning process for me started on our previous episode. And so since then, just going through my day-to-day life, walking down the street and on the train and stuff like that, I've been trying actively to name my emotions. And I don't think happiness is my default emotion. I think I'm more of a person who actually keeps sadness and melancholy more on the surface. But it's easier for me to then identify happiness when it occurs because it's more prominent. But then I think I go back to my default setting of more reflective and more calm and
I think that's
pensive.
good though. I think that shows that you can experience in a healthy way the full range of your emotions. Because you're comfortable, obviously, like you said, you're comfortable being in that state sometimes of melancholy or sadness or self-reflection.
Well,
You
I'm
don't,
not.
it's not like you're trying to escape it. And we talked about this, me and you. We had a conversation that, sometimes you just want to like, crawl up in your bed and read a book and just be sad.
Yeah.
Or just be in that state. I like it too sometimes. Actually, I like it a lot.
Well, because I'm not someone who puts headphones on and shuts myself off to the world when I'm in public. I like to be sensitive to my surroundings. I like to be inspired by my surroundings. And a lot of our surroundings, there's a lot to be positive and happy about, but it's a sad world. There's a lot of tragedy, there's a lot of disappointment. And so to be toxically positive all the time, I associate that with delusion. And
I
I
agree.
think I think you're if you're not delusional, then you're just complacent. I think we should be inspired to better our surroundings. And in order for that to happen, we have to be realistic. And positivity and happiness all the time is unrealistic.
No, I mean, yes, no, yes, I
No,
agree.
you're
Yes,
wrong, Andrew.
no, I totally agree with that. Back to what you were saying, there was one thing I wanted to touch on, something that I said in the episode that I wish I had elaborated on. So I'm going to do that right now.
That I'm speaking with the queen of toxic positivity.
Yeah. So when I said that, I think so what came to mind was, so I grew up around a lot of messages that were kind of toxic positivity messages, like a lot of messages like follow your bliss or always maintain a positive attitude. As long as you have a positive attitude, you can get through anything. So I kind of developed like a bit of a stoic kind of mentality in a way. And what's interesting is that I internalized a lot of these messages and adopted this attitude of kind of only being able to show that I was okay and happy, like nothing was ever wrong. And this ties naturally into my perfectionistic tendencies, which doesn't allow much room for feeling like I've failed. But the interesting thing is I chose a career where, working with clients one-on-one who were, like I had been exposed to some of people's like, deepest secrets and like being vulnerable with me and really opening up to me on an emotional level. And that was my strong suit, had always been to be able to be this empathetic person that was holding space for these people, like no matter what they were feeling. And I found that so interesting because I had never given myself the same level of compassion that I had showed my clients and essentially all the people in my life. And so basically what I meant in the episode, queen of toxic positivity towards myself.
When you said that, it reminded me of another thing that I learned from the episode. When people do confide in you, it does a disservice to that moment and to your friend or family member to tell them to look on the bright side. Of course, these emotions are fleeting and it will get better, but they aren't confiding in you to hear that. They're confiding in you to have that emotion where they are right now validated.
Exactly. And the worst thing you can do to someone is when they're in their pits of despair and they're really in the mess of that and feeling that emotion so powerfully, is to say something like,
turn that frown upside down,
or it'll get better. It's like, no. That is like the worst thing.
But Brock's suggestion was to say, I'm sorry. And that's very gracious of him. But here in Canada, we have butchered that expression to death. And we say, I'm sorry to everyone about everything. But just along those lines of,
I'm here for you.
I'm here for you. And I care about you. And I'm here if you want help.
And sometimes you don't even need to uncover it for them. Like, I mean, yeah, sometimes it's good to ask, why you're feeling lonely, or let's pinpoint where the emotion's coming from. But sometimes it's just, I'm here. I'll give you a hug. And just be present,
But not to be toxically positive, because as we've learned, that does not work.
Exactly. So I think we did unlearn and learn quite a few things in this episode. Thanks, Brock.
Yeah. Thank you, Brock. and the University of Melbourne for providing us the Rosie Project, and Brock Bastian, the author of The Other Side of Happiness, who we've been speaking to about toxic positivity.
So just wanted to thank you, Andrew. He managed to pull together the three of us from 3 different time zones in a matter of like 3 days. Pretty impressive.
Thank you for saying thank you. Thank you for thanking me. It made me happy, but not in the toxic kind of way. And cover art for the Regeneration show is by Antonella Giordano, photography by Alexandria Yar, featuring narration by Andrea Ruse.
Join Andrew and Stephanie for the next Regeneration show and pass it on. TheRegenerationshow.com.